You are one of the restless dead. You reside in the Shadowlands, the place of the dead, and you cannot pass on to whatever waits beyond until you settle your fetters, complete the unfinished business you left behind when you still walked the Skinlands, the mortal realm. There are many dangers, many obstacles keeping you from completing your task in the afterlife, and arguably the biggest threat comes from within. Hello, and welcome to another lore video about Wraith the Oblivion. Today we'll be discussing the bane of every Wraith who lingers on after death, the Shadow. The Shadow is a Wraith's dark mirror, a reflection of the worst depths of their personality in life. Although a Wraith is concerned with self-preservation, their Shadow is ultimately concerned with Oblivion, a constantly churning force of destruction and madness from which there is no return. It is entropy itself. But why head straight for annihilation when it's much more fun to draw the process out for as long and sadistically as possible? A Shadow offers just enough to string the Wraith along, but not enough that the eventual end isn't inevitable. Each Shadow has its own perspective and goals that ultimately lead to oblivion, whether it thinks it's the path to a new existence, craves non-existence, or does it to forge its psyche, a Wraith's soul and state of mind at the time of their death, into something new. Regardless, these goals never lead anywhere desirable. Although every Shadow is unique, most fall into archetypes with their own set of priorities, goals, tactics, and actions it favors when a Wraith is in catharsis, the state a Wraith finds itself in when it has momentarily lost the upper hand in the psychic tug-of-war with its Shadow. It should also be noted that a Shadow has access to special abilities called thorns, used exclusively to torment the psyche and accomplish whatever dark passions it has. Any Shadow worth its thorns has a few burning goals to cross off its list before it descends into oblivion, which makes the corpus, a Wraith's equivalent of a body, that they share with their psyche something that must be preserved no matter how much oblivion nips at their heels, and no matter how experienced a psyche is, they sense its Shadow's intent to harm the psyche and all they love. Restraint is one of the most difficult things a Shadow must master to bring the full potential of their darkest desires to fruition. A Shadow must sometimes ingratiate itself with its psyche and must have compelling reasons for them to trust their Shadow. Now, let's talk about the most common archetypes of the Shadows. This Shadow believes it was never human. It does not remember what it was. The alien will cast doubt on every human emotion the psyche has. Of course, this Shadow is lying. It was a human corpus, but for whatever reason, it decided it was not. Maybe it's just one giant lie to cast self-doubt on the psyche, or perhaps it just likes making the psyche question their own memory of what they once were. When dominant, this Shadow makes a psyche doubt what they remember, even convince them what they remember is wrong. This Shadow is a master of extreme gaslighting. This Shadow wants to dominate and compel others to follow it and lead them to their collective doom. The conqueror wants to own more psyches. It wants followers and its own place to call its domain. It wants the whole underworld. This Shadow does not negotiate or even consider negotiation as a practical means to its goal. It prefers to use brute force to gain whatever it seeks. When dominant, the conqueror takes command of any situation possible and does so with an iron fist. Everything this Shadow does is in service of total control, making it so the psyche does everything that the conqueror commands. This Shadow wants to wreck things, especially those things important to the psyche. The destroyer isn't seeking control or power. It wants to bring an end to everything the psyche desires, including existence. This Shadow wants to see the world burn and has little to no self-preservation instinct. The psyche will be fighting the destroyer tooth and nail not to set things on fire, not to break things to pieces, including relationships. When catharsis sets in, this Shadow compels the psyche to act on its most destructive and detrimental impulses. This Shadow believes it's never lived, and it has bubbled up from the labyrinth to attach itself to the newly dead psyche. It believes existence is a torment and a hell from which there's only one true escape. If the disincarnate could leave the psyche forever, it would instantly do so. However, because leaving isn't an option, the Shadow must drag the psyche along with it into oblivion, and it will use any means to accomplish its goal. The disincarnate does its best to share its torment with its psyche by showing them that existence is a nightmare, a bombardment of unwelcome sensations and experiences. When dominant, this shadow lashes out at or escapes anything that overstimulates it. The disincarnate abandons any situation too bright, too loud, too painful, or too overwhelming, even abandoning companions if deemed necessary, usually at the worst possible moment. Courageous beyond measure, this shadow is heroism without compassion and a champion without mercy. The fearless believes in righteous action and pushes its psyche to intervene in even the most ambiguous situations because it believes there is a single decisively correct course to take. This shadow believes doing something, even if it's wrong, is better than doing nothing at all. However, the fearless does not have a typical moral compass. After all, it is a shadow, and it believes any action that brings anyone or anything closer to oblivion is the best possible action. If this shadow can't compel the psyche to act that way, convincing the psyche to act without thinking too carefully about the consequences is the next best thing. When dominant, the fearless always knows what to do and does it without hesitation, regardless of the cost to itself or its psyche. This shadow believes that it will eventually manifest as a living human. This shadow believes that to achieve this incarnation, it must drive its psyche into oblivion. Unlike most shadows, the future reincarnation craves its future life, acting with a desperation unusual to shadows, and believes this is its one way out of the Shadowlands. To achieve its end, this shadow tempts its psyche with memories of what it was like to be alive, and the possibilities of living again. And its harrowings reflect that. We will talk about these more in future lore videos, but simplified, harrowings are surreal passion plays, intimately tied to a Wraith's sense of identity. They take place in the labyrinth, are set in the Wraith's memories, acted out by specters, and directed by the shadow, all to the ultimate goal of disconnecting the Wraith from the living world, and eventually their own sense of self. The future reincarnation plays up the torments of death, representing them as worse than they are. This shadow constantly pushes the psyche toward oblivion by dangling the possibility of reincarnating into a future life in the Skinlands. Pure craving drives the shadow forward, and if it convinces the psyche to share that craving, so much the better. When dominant, the future reincarnation seeks to experience a taste of life no matter the cost to itself or its psyche. That may mean using abilities like Embody that allow one to manifest in the physical world and appear as a living person, or puppetry, the ability to control or possess a living body. If that isn't possible, the shadow tries to get into intense situations that feel alive to it, regardless of the danger for itself or others. This shadow believes it is the superior being in its relationship with the psyche, and it does anything to preserve its superiority. The narcissist takes constant advantage of the psyche and leaves behind seeds of doubt. It isn't that this shadow has no goals, it's just that the goals of the narcissist are about its survival. This shadow doesn't want to blink out of existence, so it does whatever it can to preserve itself. The narcissist keeps the psyche from attaining any sort of transcendence or even coming close to passing on from the Shadowlands. When dominant, this shadow does whatever it wants, however it wants. The narcissist is pure self-interest and behaves as such. If there's something the psyche really wants, this shadow ensures it never happens. This shadow wants to achieve one difficult goal over all things except for oblivion. Whether that goal is to assassinate someone important or steal a powerful artifact, an item of the Shadowlands that temporarily bestows power upon the user or owner, the obsessed is constantly driven by this goal. Much like the ultimate goal of dragging its psyche into oblivion, this shadow doesn't seek to achieve it by way of the most direct route. It wants the psyche to achieve the goal, if possible. The obsessed negotiates for its goal by offering assistance in exchange for favors. If the obsessed achieves its goal, this shadow finds another one. The obsessed isn't about achieving only one goal, but rather a series of impossible goals where each one is more difficult than the last one. When dominant, this shadow manipulates the psyche and even others around them toward that goal. This shadow believes it is the reincarnation of a psyche that already fell to oblivion. The reincarnation isn't always overtly abusive or malicious, but it might devote itself to gaslighting the psyche by convincing them that things they remember didn't happen, or vice versa. The reincarnation doesn't want something as simple as forcing the psyche to relive the shadow's past life, but rather it wants to mix the two lives so the psyche no longer knows what's real for them and what happened to someone else. If the psyche can be encouraged to retrace those steps to oblivion of their own volition, so much the better. When dominant, the reincarnation seeks out or creates situations like those of its past life by choosing to relive them in harmful ways to the psyche. This shadow seeks to disrupt the existing social order. If there's authority, the revolutionary undermines it. If there's love, the shadow tries to twist it to hate. The revolutionary envisions a brave new world in which strife is the rule. When this shadow is dominant, it becomes a disruptive force and sows distrust as much as it can. In truth, the revolutionary is a narcissist whose attempts to divide and conquer serve only its own ego. In the next Wraith, the Oblivion lore video, we'll be discussing another danger ever present to Wraiths, soul forging. Remember, Restless Dead, life can get worse after it ends.